More than a dozen Scan Eagle drones, which is the first time the United States has provided those spy drones to the Ukrainians. They're made by Boeing, and they can fly at very low altitudes, which can be helpful for the Ukrainians in avoiding detection from Russian anti-aircraft and other capabilities. And now, this brings to more than $10 billion the amount of U.S. military assistance that the United States has provided to Ukraine since the start of this war just under 6 months ago. But as you point out, tensions could not really feel much higher, particularly in the region we're at in Ukraine, not far from Zaporizhia, where there are real concerns about a provocation at the largest nuclear plant in Europe after both Russia and Ukraine said they were expecting something to take place today. So far, we haven't heard anything. There hasn't been any reports of explosions. But in the past, the attacks that have occurred at the Zaporizhia plant have taken place after nightfall. And so now that we're getting into those hours, there is a lot of concern about what might take place as the state-run energy company here in Ukraine is saying that Russia may shut the nuclear plant down, detach it from the Ukrainian energy grid. Meanwhile, pregnant women and children being urged to leave the area immediately because they would be at the highest risk for radiation that could spread potentially beyond Ukraine into other parts of Europe.
Joe, this is your area of expertise. That's why we wanted you on. The Ukrainians say Russia is planning to stage a false flag attack at the plant. Help us understand just how dangerous any military action against or even near this plant could be.
This is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. There are 6 reactors there. There are 3,000 spent fuel rods. That's a lot of radioactive material. What you're worried about is an artillery shell or a rocket or even heavy caliber machine gun fire coming in and destroying the integrity of the containment, concrete containment.
Let's back that up real quick and listen to that one more time.
Plant in Europe. There are 6 reactors there. There are 3,000 spent fuel rods. That's a lot. 6 reactors there. There are. This is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. There are 6 reactors there. There are 3,000 spent fuel rods.
3,000. 3,000. I can't believe that these people are doing this. This is this isn't gross negligence. This is carelessness that could be stopped. That somebody's going to be held accountable if this thing blows, pertaining to what all is happening here, because this will be a nuclear catastrophe that will be worse than what happened. God Almighty.
A lot of radioactive material. What you're worried about is an artillery shell or a rocket or even heavy caliber machine gun fire coming in and destroying the integrity of the containment, concrete containment housing around the reactors or the fuel itself. The danger could be a small leak that could endanger people at the plant or in the surrounding area, or if one of those reactors melt down, if the power is cut off, if the water supply is cut off, if there's operating error due to the duress they're operating under, you could see a major release on the Fukushima scale that could threaten either Central Europe or Ukraine and Russia itself, depending on which way the wind is blowing.
So with that as the backdrop, we know that Russia's President Putin had a call today with the French President Macron. The Russians, in their readout of the call, said Putin would welcome nuclear inspectors to the plant, quote, as soon as possible. Why is it so important, Joe, for those experts to get inside the plant? And do you think Russia will actually give those inspectors the access they need?
We'll have to see if Putin commits to implementing his pledge. He said he would let them in at the beginning of September, but he's violated his pledges in the past. This is the key demand that's been demanded by the Director General of the IAEA. He says that the plant is already out of control, even without further attacks on it, and he wants inspectors there to reinforce what they call the 7 pillars of nuclear safety. Staff can operate without duress, there's secure power lines, there's secure supply lines, etc. So that is a critical first step. As the UN Secretary General has emphasized, though, there are 2 other steps. There has to be an immediate ceasefire in the area, and Russia should withdraw its military forces from the plant. Then and only then will this crisis end.
So, Joe, you have the worries about attacks at the plant, but on top of this now, Ukraine says Moscow is planning to disconnect the plant from the power grid, as Josh just mentioned. What does that process entail? How dangerous is just that process alone? And on top of that, what would be the impact if Ukrainians do lose power with a cold winter ahead?
A total freaking meltdown. That would be what would happen, because those emergency generators are only going to last a certain amount of time. And once those 3,000 nuclear reactors heat up so hot, it will be a total, complete meltdown, if not a mass explosion.
You know, there are a half dozen ways that this plant could turn into a disaster, and that's one of them. As I say, one of the pillars of nuclear safety is to make sure your plant has a secure connection to power lines. There are 5 power lines going into this plant. As far as I understand, 3 of them have already been damaged, so you're worried about damage to the other 2. If Putin disconnects it from the external power line, I mean, you're really then depending on backup generators or some kind of jerry-rig system where you get electricity from Russian sources. That in itself is an extremely dangerous move. Part of this is that he wants to basically steal this plant. He wants to take the largest nuclear power plant in Europe and connect it to the Russian electric grid, to turn this into a Russian electric power plant, basically annexing it the way he's trying to annex other territory in Ukraine.
We'll be keeping an eye on this, no doubt, over the coming days and weeks. Joe Cirincione, Josh Lederman, thank you for kicking us off this hour. We appreciate it. It's now awaiting.
In other words, Putin wants to steal the ability to be able to create nuclear energy from the Ukrainians that will be accomplishing 2 things. It will be giving the Russians more energy, and it will be taking less energy away, or more energy away, from the Ukrainians. In other words, we're gonna accomplish 2 things. We're gonna give ourselves all this power and energy that we need, and we're gonna take the energy away from the Ukrainians. Just the fact that the Ukrainians are not living normal lives, and they're not going to be able to produce wheat for the world in the next year, 2 years, possibly 5 or 10 years. That in and of itself is going to be such of a hurdle to have for the world, the nations, to have to go to hurdle over or hurt around. It's going to be incredible to be able to maintain any type of regular marketing prices because of just the Ukrainians being displaced. 10 million Ukrainians have been displaced. Now, if you're talking about 3,000 nuclear reactors, rods, that get hot and melt down, that will probably be the equivalency, I'm going to say, almost 3 times the amount of the original meltdown that happened in Russia of that nuclear plant, because that nuclear plant was not near this big. So you're looking at 3 times more radiation. The Atomic Nuclear Associations knows this. They know how damaging that this can be. And it will not only contaminate the ground within a 100-mile radius, for probably the next 25 or 30 years, but the ground that's right around that plant within a 10-mile radius will probably be contaminated for the next 100 years. There won't nothing be able to grow there. They don't realize what they're dealing with here. They're dealing with a substance that once it is released, you can't put it back into the bottle. It's kind of like toothpaste. Once you get the toothpaste out of the tube, you can't put it back in the tube. If this thing was to ever get that hot to the point that it melted down, with 6 major reactors there, it would be an unbelievable destruction up onto this planet that, like he said, could actually contaminate not just the Ukrainians but also the Russians, depending upon which way the wind was blowing. Or it could blow down towards Turkey or North Africa, or it could actually go back the other way. Not likely, but it could, towards going back up towards Poland and Europe and up towards Switzerland and places like that. So this is not a good thing. This is not a good thing for the Atomic Nuclear Energy Association to be allowing to be occurring at this stage in this event. And what really bothers me, I guess, as much or more so than anything, let's say a contamination was to bust loose on the planet. And I've recently seen movies, Before the Fire. I've seen another movie where the pandemic was hitting everything and wasn't nobody in charge but the military, and they was basically having to go in and just melt or dissolve cities after city after city. Let's say this thing did contaminate a great deal of the population over there to the point that even they felt like that it would be best for a mercy killing towards going ahead and blowing the rest of the nuclear silos off. That way their deaths would be quick and sudden. That scenario is, to me, the more likely scenario that could occur towards a total worldly nuclear holocaust. That if certain sectors or certain areas got so bad because of radiation poisoning that they was literally begging to want to die, that death at this point in time would be a welcoming thing. Kind of like what went on with the Jewish Holocaust. Those that was being ushered off into incinerators or being rushed off into gas chambers to the point that they was being annihilated by the hundreds of thousands. I think it was 6 million people that died during the Holocaust, which is just an unbelievable amount of people, in addition to the rest of the people that died during World War II because of a madman. But those people that was being driven like a bunch of cattle, they was doing without medical supplies, they was doing without food, they was doing without adequate sleep, they was doing without adequate clothing, they was doing without adequate this and adequate that. They was having rats chewing on certain bodily parts while they was trying to sleep. Just an infestation of a cesspool of just total unhumanitarian breaches, to the point that those people was literally wanting to die. In other words, if you could have handed some of them people a gun, they would have immediately put a bullet in between their skull to stop the suffering, the immense suffering that people was having to deal with on a hour by hour, minute by minute, during the Jewish Holocaust that eliminated so many people. The same thing could happen again. Not necessarily to the Jews, but to certain sectors of the world. And once these people become so contaminated and they was going through so much misery, they would feel like that the only quickest, best way to be able to eliminate the pain and suffering would be to annihilate the planet, or annihilate the face of the planet. That bothers me. It really does. That bothers me, because if certain conditions ever reach that level, to the point that that was to be even a element to discuss engaging into, that would basically be the end of civilization as we know it. Because not only would it kill the Homo sapiens on the planet, but it would also contaminate the water pertaining to the fish, the wildlife, fowl pertaining to the birds flying in the air, and that would basically be the end of civilization as we know it. That's the reason why it is so crucial not to allow for something like this to occur. If you can prevent it from occurring, maybe, just maybe, we won't never get to that point to where a doomsday scenario looks better than a survival scenario. Right now, the people in Ukraine are in a survival scenario. I'm sure they would love for all this to end. I'm sure that they would love for the Russians to go back home. And I'm sure that they would love to be able to get their lives back in order towards going back and living and raising crops and doing what they ordinarily do. But once you get out of that level to the point of a doomsday scenario level, then you fall into a whole new category of possibilities that could occur that ordinarily would never occur if those things was not occurring. I pray to God that this does not turn into something horrific, but I'm afraid that it may have already went too far, to the point that now it's at the point of no return. I hope not, but this just shows you the carelessness of both parties, the Russians and the Ukrainians, that are willing to forfeit the world's health on account of this idioticness of how this ever got started to begin with. Some people blame the Russians. Some people blame the Ukrainians. But if it ever reached this level, that what I'm talking about, it would be blamed upon both parties. And then it would be up to the United Nations and the rest of the world to basically end civilization over there before over there could end civilization for all of us. In other words, they wouldn't just hit just the Kremlin. They would hit that whole region with all kinds of hell. Hell would basically bust loose in those people's lives. And hopefully that would be the end of it, to the point that whatever radiation did go around the globe, that by the time it got back around to other areas here in the United States, of course the people, I'm sure, over in Alaska, they would be doomed if it ever reached that point. And I'm sure that it would affect a great deal of the people on the West Coast, more so than the people on the East Coast, because of the fallout. but that would be the only way of stopping a complete, total world nuclear holocaust if things ever got that dire over there on account of this plant exploding. The last explosion that they had over there, it dismantled about 3 million people, and as far as I know, there's still radiation coming from that plant that wasn't even a fifth of the size of this plant. It took 3 million people out of their normal life to where they had to pack up and go to another place just to get away from the radiation. So if this thing blows, there's going to be even a higher level of radiation that will even be more intense, that will even go further, and that will affect even that many more people. I just pray to God that our leaders in the world don't have to make a conscious decision between either them or us based around the military scenario, that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And if that be the case, then poisonous Putin has created his own people's demise towards Russia and the Ukrainians no longer ceasing to exist. Now, if that does not create enough concern amongst their own people to be able to plot and plan some sort of internal coup of taking out this madman pertaining to Putin, then I don't know what would. There's no other scenario that can happen on a possibility grand scale like this that could justify a group of people that would not plot and plan a coup against their own leader based around the dynamics of all this. He's not invincible. Poisonous Putin and their government of what they're doing, they're not invincible. I promise you, they're not invincible. And I promise you this, that every day we're looking at all kinds of movement going on the ground in that area, making judgment calls towards what he is doing and why he's doing it. You know, whenever this thing first erupted, it was just within a matter of days until it went to a nuclear DEFCON, indicating that Putin had put all of his nuclear agencies on standby towards a possibility strike. And as far as I know, they're still on that high ranking standby, to the point that all it would take would be the order from a madman, and the next thing you know, nuclear silos would be opening up, and the next thing you know, the world would be bombarded by a blast of nuclear bombs coming from Russia, that it would be then up to the rest of the nations to try to detour, destroy, eliminate, eradicate these bombs before it ever come over to the land of creating that much more problems in other parts of the world. Like I said, I hope and pray to God that this thing does not explode, because something like this could create one scenario that could pre-exceed another scenario, that would pre-exceed another scenario, And then the end time scenario would be that we open up hell on the world, because we have opened up hell on ourselves. I hope and pray to God that that doesn't happen, because if it does, I promise you it will change each and every person's life upon this planet in some form or fashion. I don't care if you're in the richest of the nations or the poorest of the nations. It will affect each and every person's life upon this planet, either directly or indirectly, in a way that is unimaginable, that people don't want. I have said this again and again and again and again. Protesting against this type of activity, being up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, pertaining to what was going on in Los Alamos, protesting against this type of energy, that if it ever did get loosed, it could be the death to us all. And I just pray to God that the atomic nuclear energy administrations will be on top of this towards eliminating any more stupid, careless moves up onto either the Ukrainians or the Russians, because as the old saying goes, if you play with fire, you're going to get burnt. This could be a very, very, very bad thing. Pray that it does not.
Now a waiting game. A Florida judge is waiting to get the Justice Department's redacted version.
I'm going to end right there, because that's one of the things that's wrong with our media, pertaining to our news media cycles, is that they'll get on one subject and then they'll bounce from another subject to another subject to another subject to another subject, and it basically creates a diversion of where people's minds should be, pertaining to the seriousness of what that they was just talking about, pertaining to the reactors and everything, to the point that then people put it on the back burner, and it's like, well, it's not that bad because it hadn't happened yet. What it is, it's a diversion of the possibility of it possibly could be that bad, to the point that you just ain't worried about it no longer, because now you've seen other things on the news that will get your attention towards thinking of other things, indicating that maybe this problem with the plant over there ain't that big of a deal. In other words, it becomes a diversion in your line of thinking, because now your thinking is more about an investigation down in Florida, which I could really care less about at this point in time, compared to the seriousness of what's going on with that nuclear plant, with those 3,000 nuclear reacting rods, that if it was to melt down, it could be a horrible, horrible bad thing for a great deal of people. And giving you the worst case scenario towards going from a doomsday scenario to the worst type of scenario, towards people basically thinking that this was going to be their answer, which was basically turning into I guess you'd call it a mercy nuclear attack, towards thinking that that was going to eliminate all the pain and suffering by putting everybody asleep real quick. That's the scenario that I never ever hope that will happen upon this planet. It would be the same thing as taking an individual that was suffering real bad, that was hooked up on a machine, a life support machine, knowing that they wasn't going to never get no better, and basically you pulling a plug and saying, well, this was a mercy killing. We basically got this person out of all these problems that he or she was in, because basically technically they was already dead to begin with. Once something gets into that level on a big worldly grand scale, especially dealing with nuclear radiation and nuclear fallout, that would be the worst case scenario that could happen to the planet Earth, towards people actually thinking that they're doing the right thing by pushing all the buttons at the same time, opening up all the nuclear silos at the same time, and basically being the doomsday end time mercy nuclear non-existence to life. That would be the worst case scenario, to where people actually thought that they was doing the proper and the right thing because of the pain and the suffering, the relinquished pain and the suffering. That's why it's critical that we never ever get into that state of thinking to where we think that this is the best way out, is just to end it all. I just pray to God that that won't never happen in my lifetime or in the lifetime of this planet, to where humanity actually reaches that point that they feel like that their best way out is the easy way out towards pressing the buttons for everybody. Pray to God that that will not never, ever, ever happen. Because you're talking about a doomsday scenario that would basically be the end of civilization as we know it. Thanks again for listening. Good luck to each and every one of us. God bless you. God bless our American troops. God bless America in her endeavors towards where we go from here. We want to thank you for your patience and your time. And shalom.